Hello, and welcome to the Best Practices video focusing on adding and subtracting decimals, 4th grade.
Add a point to the right, put two zeros on the side, subtract and hope your answer is right. We line up decimals when we add and subtract. So line them up, line them up, line them up, and we solve them.
So here's a look at sometimes how adding and subtracting decimals is taught, where we're just lining up the decimal points, adding and subtracting, following some steps to add some zeros, but kids may not always understand those steps. So we're going to look at some strategies in this video that's going to help them understand why we line up the decimal point and add zeros. In this 4th grade unit, we're focusing on adding and subtracting decimals, exploring that adding and subtracting of multi-digit numbers with decimals to the hundredths, using those concrete models and strategies based on place values, such as place value charts, and making sure we're adding like place values. We're also moving to solving real-world 1- and 2-step addition and subtraction problems that include money when we're talking about decimals. So what does student learning look like in the classroom? We're focusing on using those base 10 block models, just like we did when we did whole number addition and subtraction. We want to make sure students are visualizing the problems and understanding how the process of adding and subtracting decimals work. We also can even get into regrouping 10 tenths for one whole and actually visualize that process. So later down the road, when we take it to numbers, students have an understanding of why that happens. And same thing whenever we're getting into subtracting decimals. You're starting with that model, you're representing it, you're removing pieces to show that subtraction, you're estimating, you're making connections back to the model so students truly understand how subtraction of decimals works. You can even get into the process of regrouping. So for example, if I need to subtract something that I don't have enough of, I can regroup that amount and break it apart. We're even getting into those base 10 grid models and making sure that students understand how to move from that concrete to that representational and eventually to the abstract. We're also focusing on 1- and 2-step word problems. So we're going to have students explore using those coins and dollar amounts to represent that addition and subtraction, make connections back to the base 10 models, but once again, make it hands-on and make students understand how the process works. What does student learning sound like in the classroom? You might hear, how did you use the grid models to add your whole numbers and decimals? Really focusing kids on explaining their strategies and their models and how it relates to the problem. Does the place of a digit affect the value of a number when subtracting whole numbers? Making sure that they're focusing on place value as they're adding and subtracting and adding like place values. Why is knowing how to add and subtract money important? This is so big. We want them to know why it's important that they're learning what they're learning. And this also gets into those 1- and 2-step word problems that are real world. And then when you subtracted, what did you have to do if there was not enough money in one place value for you to take from? That's really getting into that regrouping and renaming language, but having them explain the steps and understand the steps, not just a procedure. This is the vocabulary you should hear as students are discussing the math and making sure they're using that precise language. Add-ins, addition, decimal, difference, hundredths place, subtract, sum, tenths place. So once again, we should hear students using this language as they talk about the math. How will students demonstrate their knowledge? So taken from of the different STEMscopes resources, you can see an Explore here where we're subtracting using those base 10 models and that base 10 grid paper, and then moving into estimating, recording the equation and the solution. Here's another example looking at those 1- and 2-step word problems involving money. And then you might even see some type of game like this where it's called Pop's Diner. And basically, they're using a menu and creating an order. And if I have this much money, what can I buy? And how much change will I receive? So, really, that real world application. Here are some questions to ask to gauge student understanding. In the first situation, we have them figuring out the value of the expression and using a model to prove their answer. We want to make sure they're using those base 10 models, whether it's base 10 blocks, base 10 grids, and really being able to explain how they use them to arrive at the sum. Then we want to know how to use place value to add or subtract money. I know we added and subtracted using place value with just decimals. How does that still transfer with money? So once again, we can have them kind of explain how digits in like places are what we're wanting to add and subtract, and also connecting decimals and whole numbers to dollars and cents. And also, what steps can I take to correctly determine the amount of change I should receive? We want students to understand that sometimes this is more than one step, but we still want them to use that place value language whenever they're explaining how they subtracted to find that change or even add it up. Here's an engaging task or activity for home. This is called Numbers in the News. So basically, you're going to look at current events in the news that involve decimal numbers, work to kind of add or subtract numbers, discussing these real life situations, and challenge each other to solve the problem in a different way. You can even look for the local shoppers at grocery stores or pharmacies and really just make it that real world application. So here's an image just to show you how your kids are going to feel when they finally understand adding and subtracting decimals. They're going to feel great about all the models that they use, the understanding that they have, using that place value language, connecting money to those whole numbers and decimals. So we hope you enjoyed the video. We look forward to seeing you next time.